Good morning, everybody. My name is Gabriel Glanda. I belong to the Round Valley Indian tribes of Northern California, specifically Mendocino County. Descending from the Nomalaki and Concow peoples, I currently make my home in Seattle, Washington, and I'm grateful to Carma for having me here today, and grateful for the first peoples, the original peoples of these lands, for welcoming us all here, and very grateful to be in such a beautiful, beautiful facility here at Portland State University. I've had the good fortune of founding and working with an organization called Hoyt, headquartered in Seattle, Washington. We're indigenous run, we're completely pro bono, and Hoyt is a close Salish Lushootseed word that means see you again, we never say goodbye. And so we say Hoyt to one another as we part ways, and we felt it important to sort of recognize our relatives who are often forgotten in iron houses and let them know we will see you again, we will never say goodbye to you. And I'm here just to briefly tell you the story of Hoyt and to share with you the work that we do. This is a photo taken at a powwow at the Walla Walla State Penitentiary last summer. And our work is really focused on providing religious, spiritual, and cultural support for our incarcerated relatives in the Washington State Department of Corrections in particular. We have about 1,000 relatives who are incarcerated in that state system so that they, one, are not being infracted while they are down. They are behaving as good relations with each other and with others in the prison environment, but more importantly, to prepare them to come home, to allow them to seek rehabilitation and healing from a spiritual and religious and cultural point of view, so that if or when they are allowed to come home, they are ready to come home, and they don't make the mistake again that got them in prison to begin with. Next slide. I want to begin by recognizing a number of relatives on whose shoulders we stand at Hoyt. Relatives who came into this space and into this work, honestly, before I was on the earth and before I came to this work about 12 years ago. And that starts with Janet McLeod, who is a revered, now ancestor, but then elder of the Nisqually people, a frontline warrior for indigenous peoples, including in the Fish Wars. And in the 1970s, she blazed a path into the Department of Corrections to make sure that our relatives who were being imprisoned at that time had an opportunity to worship in their traditional ways as a mode of rehabilitation. Next slide. That work was then carried on by another warrior for Coast Salish people and the river people of the Puyallup tribe, Ramona Bennett, former chairwoman of the tribe, who carried on the legacy that Janet McLeod started by furthering that work into the 1980s. Next slide. That work has since been led by an elder from the Kalispel people named Francis Kuluya. And it's hard to figure out when Francis started. I'm not sure if it's the 90s or the 80s, but he's been around the DOC for a very, very long time, providing spiritual leadership and guidance to a number of the brothers in particular who are incarcerated throughout the state of Washington, and he sits on our board. Next slide. And this is the gentleman, the brother of mine, who brought me into this work in 2010. And very quickly, I'll just tell you a story that soon after Easter Sunday, 2010, I believe it was May 5th, I got a call from this gentleman. And he explained to me that he was attempting to go into the Department of Corrections Monroe Correction Center to facilitate worship on change of seasons, which would involve a sweat lodge of a circle. And he was bringing tobacco into that ceremony to help teach these relatives how to pray and offer up prayer to Creator. And for whatever reason, he was not allowed into ceremony that day. He was walked off the hill, as he put it to me on May 5th, 2010, because he had tobacco with him. And we scratched our head, why could that be? Because up until that point, tobacco had been authorized through state systems and protocols as something that could be brought in by a so-called native chaplain, shared with the brothers, and offered in prayer. Well, what we learned is that in the year 2010, as our sister was a witness, well, she was down at that time, the State Department of Corrections, under guise of budget cutting, recall that was the time of the Great Recession, really took a pen to a list of things that could be accomplished in worship and things that could be brought to worship and struck them out. Sweat lodge, tobacco, kinnikinnick, lavender, sage. Whatever it was that these relatives were allowed to do before that time period was no longer allowed. Outright unconstitutional, completely illegal. And it was this man who stepped forward to me and said, I don't know why this happened, but what happened to me is wrong. Under any system, creator system, federal law, state law, this isn't the way it should be. And so we embarked upon a campaign that year to have everything restored, which we did the following year with the support of a number of tribes and community advocates. But it's this relative who we lost last year who called upon me to do that work. Creator called upon me through him to do that work, and who led us into that work for the next several years. His name is Wakadip from Tulalip. His white name is Robert Monger. Next slide. And this is where the work really began in earnest. This is a presentation to the then governor of the state of Washington, Christine Gregoire, with all the tribes in attendance at the annual Centennial Accord meeting, where we let her know what she had done or allowed to happen on her watch was completely illegal. It was completely wrong, and it needed to be corrected. And to the state's credit, her credit and the credit of then Secretary of the DOC, Eldon Vale, they said, you know what, you're right, and we're sorry. And for the state of Washington, given the history of relations between it and the indigenous peoples of those lands, to actually admit that they were wrong, and not only that, but to say they were sorry, was nothing short of historic. And it's something that we celebrate to this day, because we are now in partnership with them because of that humble moment by the governor, by the secretary, by the entire state of Washington to admit what they did to our relatives was wrong. Next slide. And 2 years later, we formed Hoyt. And this is us at a presentation at Seattle University Law School, telling the story of what had happened over the prior 2 years to our relatives and how we reformed the State Department of Corrections through our advocacy and restored what had been taken from them. And we've been in operations now for the last 11 years. Next slide. And this is our board, and you see our brother Leandro Willie here, who spent some time down in the DOC, is now on the outside doing good work with us. I want to recognize my sisters to the left there, Winona Stevens and Minty Longearth, who we work with very, very closely. But this entire group of relatives now works together with us on behalf of those relatives. And the gentleman with the gray hair in the back sitting on our board is the Department of Corrections Secretary Eldon Vale, who said in 2010 and 11 that he was sorry. He now works with us to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Next slide. So the theme to my speech is medicine. What we do in our work is to provide medicine to our relatives so that they are allowed to heal while they're in the Iron House, in hope and in prayer that when they come home, they are better off for it, that they have healed from the mistake they made. They have healed the harm that they have caused to other people and the harm that they've caused their family. Our entire work is about that. And it's very narrow. We are not focused on what happened to them necessarily before they got in the Iron House. We are supportive of the work involved with what will happen when they come home, the reentry work that Leandro and others are doing. Our focus is, while they are there, making sure that they have their rights bestowed by Creator, bestowed by law, to worship, to pray, and to seek forgiveness in their own traditional ways, so that they will better themselves and again heal themselves as they hopefully return home. This is a rare image of a sweat lodge. We provide support when sweat lodges needed to be built or repaired. We will have people harvest willows. We will have ground blessed. We will have the brothers taught how to make lodge, how to repair lodge, how to make lodge sacred. Again, that's medicine that we offer those brothers through the work that we do on the outside. Next slide. We've had to fight for things like this. This is a sacred items box, which in the DOC means if your sacred belongings are put in this box, they cannot be rifled through by prison guards, at least theoretically. They cannot be dumped out by prison guards. They cannot be disrespected or mishandled by prison guards. Yes, it's artificial. Yes, it's a cardboard box with an odd moniker on it. But we fight for this protocol so that if your eagle feathers or your pipe or items of regalia or your medicine are placed in these boxes, they are to be left alone by corrections officers rather than disrespected or mishandled by them. The point I'll make through all the things I'll show you is we have to advocate for and fight for everything. Every box, every bead, every piece of yarn, every piece of buckskin, every willow branch. And that's what we are focused on doing to make sure, again, those relatives have a traditional opportunity to worship. Next slide. This is something I'm the most proud of, perhaps in recent years, is we're actually working with Department of Corrections in 12 of its prisons to create sacred space for medicines to be planted. Planted by relatives, tended by relatives, harvested by relatives, and then ultimately offered up as prayer by relatives. The prison likes this because they don't have to deal with so-called contraband when outside things come into the prison, and sometimes I have to confess, sometimes our medicine can be used as vehicles for drugs, for brothers or sisters who are not yet on the good path. But even those medicine bundles that come in a good way can be mishandled. They can be disrespected. They can be misplaced. This is something that allows the prison to feel safe and secure in that medicine is being harvested within the prison. It's not coming in from the outside. And what a spectacular opportunity it provides our relatives to basically harvest their own medicine. And in this whole spirit of land back, we are now reclaiming, and granted, it's just a few meets and bounds in any given prison, but land that is then blessed and used to plant and harvest these medicines by these relatives as part of their new journey. And whether it's lavender or sweetgrass or sage, it's something that I'm very, very proud about what we've accomplished. Next slide. And you can see the starts here that some of the brothers have been able to grow, and they then get planted in the earth, harvested when the time is right, dried into medicine and offered in prayer. Next slide. And here's just a bag of medicine that I was handed by a prison official at the Washington State Penitentiary when I went to powwow last summer. And I just took a moment to feel the power of this medicine as I stood outside that iron house, and you can see the backdrop, and just have a moment where I realized what we had accomplished for those brothers and what this medicine represents to them on their new journey. Next slide. And it's all about not just spirituality and religion, but culture. And so these gentlemen are a young group of men who have beaded their regalia, sewed their regalia in preparation for powwow. They've learned songs, they've learned dances. Some of them didn't know those ways before they got into prison, and they've been taught those ways with our support by their elders in the circle and by people who are coming in from the outside to make sure that they have the support that they need to learn. So this is a group of young men last year at the Walla Walla State Penitentiary, showing off their new wares, showing off their new dance moves, participating in song, participating in celebration, and feeling for a moment an ounce of freedom. And again, every strand, every bead, every detail on these pieces of regalia is something that we've advocated for and fought to protect once we've had it. Next slide. And what's traditional in these powwows is very elaborate giveaways. And we fight to make sure that between powwows, which happen once a year, that these brothers are allowed what they need to bead or paint or draw or sew, and while doing so, to remain in prayer. And if you have the good fortune of attending a powwow, please do, because the amount of effort that these brothers and sisters put into these offerings for giveaway is spectacular. And in my experience, everyone that comes to a powwow is leaving with something as spectacular as the pieces of art you see on the table here, through the good work these relatives are doing to make themselves better. Next slide. This image is stunning. It's from Underscore News, a local photojournalist, I think, here in the Portland area named Jared Work. And it just says everything about what we are trying to do for our relatives to give them a second chance. And the majesty and splendor and beauty of this woman dancing, captured in this image, is just so powerful, and I wanted to share it with you all. Next slide. I love this image from Airway Heights, a powwow that happened this summer under this vast blue sky, a group of relatives gathering at the drum to sing. And to me, this is freedom. For one day a year, our relatives feel free. Preferably under a blue sky, sometimes though it's in a cafeteria. On green grass, sometimes it's on the linoleum. But with relatives coming in from the outside to sing and drum and dance and pray and break bread, that's as close as these relatives come to freedom, and they feel it one day a year, and they rejoice on that day. Next slide. And this image gets me choked up. This is a brother and his mom who hadn't seen each other in a very long time. And he's down for a long time. And this was coming out of COVID, where they especially had been severed from one another. But this moment is just priceless. Next slide. And children. This is something we also fought for. Several years ago, children were, for some reason, also no longer allowed to attend a powwow. So imagine any cultural celebration, any religious celebration, any spiritual celebration or opportunity for worship without your child or your niece or your nephew or your granddaughter or your grandson. And it actually took advocacy and policy making, and we actually write checks to ensure that security guards are present at these powwows to make sure that these children are safe at all times to get them back in. But this intergenerational connection that we've helped restore is also something that we're very, very proud of. Next slide. And again, it's freedom. And whether it's under a banner of the American flag or under blue sky or just under Creator's ways, these images of freedom and these brothers being able to dance and feel some semblance of what it means to be indigenous, perhaps what it means to be normal, is what we fight for year in and year out. Next slide. And we do this through advocacy. And we have had many occasions to threaten litigation, but we've never had to file a lawsuit. We've had many occasions to speak very candidly with prison officials about misbehavior and malfeasance on the part of the state of Washington, but we've never had to sue them. We see that as medicine. We are trying to heal our relatives and heal a broken system that is hurting our relatives and impeding their ability towards rehabilitation. This also is at the Washington State Penitentiary, where in the 1970s, my dad was down while my mom was pregnant with me in 1975 or 1976. And so it's an honor and privilege to go back there and be able to advocate for those relatives, to give them the opportunities that perhaps my dad didn't have. My mom ended up in prison in Purdy, as you were, in the year 2000. And I paused to wonder if she had better opportunity, perhaps her path may have altered when she got on the outside. She's no longer with us today, neither is my father. Next slide. And we also do this through diplomacy. We will sit, and again, at times it's uncomfortable, with the powers that be in the state of Washington, the governor, the secretary, including the secretary, Cheryl Strange. This is me seated with Willie Frank, Billy Frank's son, who's now the chairman of the Nisqually tribe. We have found that even in disagreement and discord and discomfort, that we can generally work through those differences, can be because we're on the right side of the law. Again, whether it's Creator's law or federal law, we stand on the right side of law. So there's not a lot that this Department of Correction can say when we present that truth to them. But we've had the good fortune of not having to file lawsuits and be able to sit down with them, again, even in uncomfortable moments, and work through our disagreements to make sure that our relatives have what they need. Next slide. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and just thank you for your time and your audience and the very fortunate opportunity to be with you all. Thank you very, very much.